things that were quite incompatible with faith in a good God. They said, how can I believe in a good God after the mud and blood of the trenches of World War I? I was in a church in East London recently where before World War I, they had a men's meeting on a Monday night of 1,000 men. And they influenced national politics. One speaker at that Monday night meeting caused the resignation of a cabinet minister the Tuesday morning. There were members of parliament in that meeting. That meeting spoke to the nation and was effective. I said to the church, do you have one now? No. When did it go? They said, well, we tried to revive it after World War I. We got up to about 20 or 30, and then it fizzled out. And that could be said of many, many churches. If you look at the war memorials in churches, have you noticed how many more names there are in World War I than World War II? That's because many men went from the church to World War I. Not so many went from the church to World War II. There'd been this drop. And World War II simply accelerated it. Well, it meant that World War I led to a gigantic social revolution in England that had never happened before. Never before had so many men gone to war. Of course, it was voluntary at first, later conscription came, but the manhood of England went to war. And therefore, for the first time, women were taking over men's responsibilities. The home was run by the women for 4 years in some cases. The factories were now full of women. The factory hands were female. It is no accident, of course, that they immediately demanded the vote at the same time. We're doing a man's job. Only men could vote up till then. We want the vote. No, I'm not saying this is a good or a bad development. What I'm trying to communicate is a gigantic social revolution had taken place in the absence of the men. And we have not recovered from that. When the men came home exhausted from the war, they said virtually to their wives, you're doing a grand job, you just carry on. And from that day, most of the decisions in most homes in England are made by the wife, not the husband. The husband regards his responsibility as fulfilled when he brings the wages home Friday night. That's his bit done. And the wife has to make the major decisions. In many homes, it is the wife who has to budget the way the wages are spent, whereas the Bible puts that responsibility firmly on the man. Wives should not have to worry about money. It is the man's responsibility to make provision, adequate provision, and to budget. But in many homes I go to, the poor wife is struggling to balance payment on the telly and on the car and with the housekeeping and everything else. That is a burden she should not be carrying. But in most homes, she is the queen, so she rules. She reigns. In Wales, it's mam who does. In England, it's mum. But that was World War I. And so we have, how many years? 70 years to make up to get the men back to church. And it's an uphill battle. It's not easy. That's one reason. World War I and II took the men away and they did not come back. Second reason, and I'm speaking plainly today, is an effeminate clergy. Now, there are many reasons for this. Partly the job tends to attract that kind of men. Partly the selection process has that effect. And partly it is that once a man finds himself among women and children and having to thank the ladies for making the tea, he changes his style. A vicar in the South Coast said to me, my church is full of old ladies of both sexes. And I wanted to say to him, and thinking it is as bad as saying it according to Jesus, but I thought that's because there's one in the pulpit. When he put on his white frock on Sunday and climbed into the pulpit, his gestures, his style was geared to all the retired ladies on the South Coast. Even though physically he was male, his manner of ministry was thoroughly feminine. And the average caricature of a vicar on television is feminine. A follower rather than a leader. They don't, I notice, do that with Catholic priests in films and TV plays. They certainly do it with Anglican vicars and Free Church ministers. There's an element of truth here. If you think I'm just talking through my hat, here is a recent cutting of a survey of Church of England ordinands, about a couple of hundred of them, no more. A survey of 155 male and 97 female Anglican ordinands revealed that women ordinands were no less tough-minded or stable than their male colleagues, and in key aspects the women had a characteristically masculine profile. Surprisingly, the men were typically introvert, shy, and feminine. That was the majority, of course. There are exceptions. And so the ministry of the church has not attracted men's men for the most part. And the selection process has gone for safe rather than risky people. And one of the characteristics of masculinity is the willingness to take risks and to stick your neck out. But of course, that's always a threat to a system. And also the fact that ministering to women and children for most of the time affects a person. I was sitting in a family service with my wife recently, and I'm going to caricature so that you recognize, but this is nearly what happened. The dear man preaching, this is the sermon. He said, "Now," he said, "can anyone tell me anything about a man called Daniel?" And there was dead silence in the congregation. Nobody answered. Said, come on, anybody? No? And a little housewife in the front row with a row of babies in pushchairs in front of her. I don't know if they were all hers or not, but she raised a hand and she said, "I think I know." He said, "Yes? What do you know about Daniel?" And she said, "He pulled a thorn out of a lion's paw." Now, I'm glad you laughed at that. You must know that that's an old Greek legend about a man called Androcles. But anyway, she tried. And the dear priest said, "Good try, not quite right, but good try. Anybody else?" Nobody else. "Well, I'll have to tell you," he said, "Daniel was thrown into a fiery furnace." Well, I'm glad more of you laughed then. I'd begun to think you didn't know your Bible. But anyway, my wife dug me in the ribs and just whispered the blind leading the blind, and we began to giggle. But I looked around at the men at that point, and they were either checking to see that they had the same colored socks on, or they were studying the electric light fittings. They were thoroughly embarrassed. It was supposed to be a family service, but there was nothing for men in it. The sermon was treating us all like a Sunday school class. Do you follow me? And those men looked as if they couldn't wait to get out and have a fag. No, they were just totally out of their setting and context. Well, this is the second major reason I came to realize an effeminate clergy, and the clergy produces the church. The one problem with being a minister or a vicar or a pastor is that people follow you. Of course, you say you want that. Actually, they don't follow what you say, they follow what you do and what you are. A third reason is that it's much easier for women to become Christians than men. And I want to explain why. Every woman in her heart is looking for a man to whom she can entrust her life. Someone she can trust to protect her, to provide for her, to do what she needs. Someone to look up to honor and obey. Every woman is looking for such a man. And of course, when they find Jesus, they have found the perfect man. It is almost natural for them to respond